All right, so today we're diving into something that's like the backbone of good software,
Oh, yeah,
test documentation.
absolutely.
We're going to break down, really what are those key components? We're talking test scenarios,
Yes,
test cases, and test scripts.
those are the big three.
And this is really, how software gets that stamp of approval, right? Make sure it actually works the way it's supposed to.
Right. And, you know, whether you are somebody who's trying to get certified in software testing,
Right.
or maybe you just want to know more about how to create good documentation.
Yeah.
Maybe you're just, fascinated by the whole world of quality assurance. Understanding these three things that we're going to talk about today,
Yeah.
it's really important.
Yeah, it's fundamental.
Yeah, it's like if you were looking at a skyscraper, you want to know, like, what's holding this thing up.
Yeah.
You got to look at the foundation,
Right. The guts.
the guts.
Yeah.
This is the guts of software quality.
Absolutely. So I guess our mission today really is to go through each of these three areas, right? Test scenarios, test cases, test scripts.
Oh.
Really try to understand how they work and why they're so important.
Yeah, and see how they all fit together, right?
Yeah.
Because it's all part of the same process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let's kick things off with test scenarios.
Okay.
What exactly are we talking about here? Like, what's the basic idea?
So test scenarios, they're kind of like, think of it like a high-level description of what you need to test.
Okay.
So you're not getting into all the nitty-gritty details yet.
Right, right.
You're kind of like if you were, I don't know, like writing a movie plot.
Right.
You're outlining the main events.
Yeah.
You're talking about the characters, but you're not writing out every single line of dialogue.
Gotcha.
Test scenarios are kind of the same. You're focused on what are the user journeys, or what are the key business requirements that you're trying to validate.
Okay, so it's that big picture view of what needs to be tested.
Exactly. Like, we need to make sure this thing works,
Right.
but we don't really care how yet.
Right, exactly. So, like, let's say you're testing an online store. Would a test scenario be something like, verify that a customer can actually make a purchase?
Yeah, that's a great example. Like,
Cool.
you want to make sure that whole process works
Right.
from start to finish.
Right, without getting bogged down in the specifics of, like, which payment method they use or all the steps in the checkout process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're just saying, this is an essential piece of functionality. It has to work.
Right.
A really common example is like verify that a user can successfully log in using valid credentials.
Oh, yeah, that's classic.
Right.
So basic, but so important.
It is. It is. So that immediately tells you, okay, we need to make sure login works.
Yeah,
But again, not how.
not the nitty-gritty.
Right.
Okay, so then when it comes to actually writing these test scenarios, are there certain best practices or things to keep in mind?
Definitely, yeah. So first off, you want to keep your scenarios broad. You want to make sure that one scenario can kind of cover a bunch of different, more specific tests. Right?
Okay, so it's efficient, it can apply in different situations.
Exactly. And then you also want it to be reusable. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
You don't want to be writing a new scenario for every little thing.
Right, right.
What else?
Okay, so another thing to keep in mind is you got to really think about the user, right?
Put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah, like how are they actually going to be using this software? What are their goals? What are the typical paths they'll take through the application?
So it's about empathy for the end user.
Exactly. Now, here's where some people go wrong. They start adding way too much detail.
Yeah, you're getting into the weeds.
Right. And that's not what a test scenario is for. The details come later in your test cases.
Right. Okay, so keep it high level, the big picture stuff. Exactly. And then finally, you got to make sure your test scenarios align with, the actual business requirements and the use cases for the software.
So you're not just testing random stuff, you're testing what actually matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because if a feature doesn't have a clear business need, why are you even testing it?
Right. You got to make sure it delivers value to the user.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've got the big picture, the high level stuff with test scenarios. Now let's zoom in a little bit.
Okay.
Talk about test cases. So how do those differ? What's the key difference here?
So test cases, that's where you get into the nitty-gritty, right?
Okay.
It's a very detailed, step-by-step instruction for how to test something very specific.
Gotcha.
So remember that movie plot we talked about?
Yeah.
Test scenario is like the outline.
Okay.
Test case is like one specific scene.
Okay.
You're describing exactly what happens, what actions the characters take, what props they use, what the expected outcome is.
Okay.
And you had to be super precise, super clear.
I see. So if the scenario is verify login, a test case would spell out exactly how to do that.
Exactly. Like what username and password to enter, where to click, what you should see on the screen afterwards.
So no room for ambiguity. It's like a recipe.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You want anyone to be able to pick up this test case and execute it without any confusion.
Makes sense. So there's actually, I understand, like a standard structure for test cases.
Yeah.
And something to do with ISTQB, right?
That's right.
What is that all about?
So ISTQB, that stands for the International Software Testing Qualifications Board.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of a big deal in the testing world.
Gotcha.
And they have a standard structure for test cases
Okay.
that's used by a lot of people, a lot of companies.
Right.
And this structure really helps make sure that, everyone's on the same page when it comes to testing.
Yeah, consistency across the board.
Yeah.
So what are the key elements?
Okay, so first you've got your test case ID.
Okay.
That's just a unique identifier.
Right.
Like TC001 or something.
Okay. You can keep track of all your test cases, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Helps you organize everything.
Gotcha.
Then you've got your title or objective,
Okay.
which basically just says, in a very clear and concise way, what this specific test is trying to verify.
Makes sense. You need to know the purpose of each test. What else?
Then you've got your preconditions.
Okay.
These are like things that need to be in place before you can even start the test.
Okay, like setting the stage.
Exactly. So, for our login example, a precondition might be that you actually have a user account
Right.
with a valid username and password.
Makes sense.
Then comes the heart of the test case, the
Oh.
test steps.
Okay, the action.
Right. This is where you break down step by step what the tester needs to do.
So for the login example, this would be like, open the login page, enter your username, enter your password, hit the login button.
Exactly. Yeah. You're laying it all out. No room for interpretation.
I see. Super specific instructions. Okay, so then how do we know if the test actually passed or failed?
That's where the expected result comes in.
Right.
You basically say, if the test passes, this is what should happen.
Okay.
So for login, it might be something like the user is successfully logged in and redirected to their dashboard.
Got it.
And then after you execute the test, you record the actual result.
Right. What actually went down.
Exactly. And then you compare the two and you give it a pass-fail status.
Makes sense.
And then sometimes you might have a section for test data,
Okay.
which just lists any specific data that you used in the test.
So for login, that would be like the actual username and password you use.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's like a super detailed log of everything that happened, what was supposed to happen, what did happen.
Yep, exactly. You want to be able to look back and understand exactly what was done.
Makes total sense. So could you like maybe just run through that whole login example with all the ISTQB parts filled in?
Sure. So it would look something like this.
Okay.
Test case ID, TEAC login 001,
Okay.
title, verify successful login with valid credentials. Preconditions, a user account with username validuser and password secure 123 exists.
Got it.
Test steps. 1. Open the application's login page. 2. Enter validuser in the username field. 3. Enter secure 123 in the password field. 4. Click the login button. Expected result. The user is successfully logged in and redirected to the user's dashboard. Actual result.
Yeah.
Well, we'd fill that in after running the
Right.
status. Pass, fail, again, we'll see. And then test data. Username, validuser, password, secure 123.
Wow. Okay, so that really gives you a much clearer picture of how detailed these test cases can get.
Yeah, you got to be specific.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So any other like best practices we should keep in mind when we're actually writing these detailed instructions?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, above all, you got to be clear.
Right.
You got to be concise. Every step should be easy to understand no matter who's reading it.
Yeah.
You also want to keep your formatting consistent across all your test cases.
Okay.
That just makes it easier for everyone to read and understand.
Yeah. It's more professional.
Right. And then a big one, you got to be able to trace your test cases back to the original requirements.
Right.
You got to be able to say, okay, this test case is verifying this specific user story or business rule.
So you're making sure you're actually testing what the software is supposed to do.
Exactly. And lastly, you want to write them so that anyone can execute them,
Right.
even if they've never tested this feature before.
No hidden assumptions.
Right. You don't want any implicit steps or anything like that.
Gotcha. So you want them to be like foolproof recipes for finding bugs.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The more detailed and clear your instructions are, the better your testing will be.
Awesome. All right. So we've gone from the high level scenarios to the granular test cases. Now let's talk about test scripts.
Okay.
This is where automation comes in, right?
Yes, exactly.
Tell us more about that.
So test scripts are basically sets of instructions, and they're often written in a special language that a computer can understand.
Okay.
And these instructions are designed to automate your test cases.
Gotcha.
So instead of a human tester having to go through all those steps manually,
Right.
the computer can just execute the test automatically.
So like for that login example we were talking about, instead of a tester having to open the browser, type in the username and password, hit enter every single time, a test script could just do that in like a second.
Exactly, yeah. That's the beauty of automation.
So can you give us like a real world example of what a test script might look like?
Yeah, definitely. So there's this popular framework called Selenium.
Okay.
It's used a lot for automating web browsers.
Okay.
And you can write scripts in different programming languages.
Right.
One of the most common is Java. So here's what a simple Selenium script for that login test might look like.
Okay.
It starts with a few lines that import necessary components.
Okay.
So you have import org.openella.selenium.webdriver, import org.openella.selenium.chrome.chromedriver, import org.openella.selenium.by. That's just setting things up.
Gotcha.
Then you have this line that says system.setProperty, WebDriver.chrome.driver, path to Chrome driver.
Okay, that looks technical. What's that all about?
So this line, it's super important. It tells your system where to find something called the Chrome driver,
Okay.
which is basically a piece of software that allows Selenium to control the Chrome browser.
Got it. So it's like the bridge between Selenium and your actual browser.
Exactly. Yeah. You need this so Selenium can actually do stuff in the browser.
Makes sense.
And you would replace path to Chrome driver with the actual path on your computer.
Okay.
Then you've got this line, WebDriver driver, new Chrome driver.
Okay, so it's creating something called a web driver.
Exactly. This line creates a new instance of the Chrome browser, which Selenium can then use.
So this is where we're actually opening up a Chrome window.
Right. And then comes this line, driver.get, https.example.com/login.
Okay, pretty self-explanatory. It's going to that website.
Yeah, this line tells the browser to navigate to the login page of our website.
Makes sense.
Then we have a few lines that use this thing called driver.findElement by.i.
Okay, so we're finding elements on the page, I guess.
Exactly. So in this case, we're finding the elements with the IDs username, password, and login BTN.
Right, because every element on a web page has a unique ID.
Yep. And those are typically used to interact with specific elements.
Okay.
And then we use send keys to enter the username and password.
So it's like the script is typing those in for us.
Exactly.
And then click to simulate clicking the login button.
Right. So now we've basically automated the whole login process.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And then finally we have driver.quit, which closes the browser window.
Nice and clean.
Exactly.
So obviously in a real test script, you'd probably have more going on.
Yeah. You'd probably have things called assertions,
Okay.
which basically check if the expected outcome actually happened.
Right, right.
Like, did the user actually get logged in and redirected to the right page?
Yeah, because we need to know if the test passed or failed.
Exactly, yeah. That's what the assertions are for.
Makes sense. So this script, it's like a blueprint for automating those test cases.
Yeah, you're basically translating those manual steps into code that a computer can understand.
So cool. Any other like best practices we should know about for writing these test scripts?
Definitely, yeah. So first, you want to try to keep your scripts modular.
Okay. What does that mean?
It means you break them down into smaller, reusable chunks.
Okay.
Like, for example, you might create a separate function just for logging in.
Right.
And then you can reuse that function in other scripts.
So you don't have to write the same code over and over again.
Exactly.
That's smart. What else?
Then you want to use good naming conventions.
Okay.
Like give your scripts, your variables, your functions clear and meaningful names.
Right.
It's just good coding practice.
Yeah, it makes the code easier to read and understand.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And then error handling.
Okay, what's that?
So you got to make sure your scripts can handle unexpected situations.
Right. Because things don't always go according to plan.
Right.
Right.
Like what if a web page takes too long to load or an element doesn't appear?
Right, you don't want the whole thing to crash.
Exactly. So you need to build in ways to handle these situations gracefully.
Gotcha, make it robust.
Exactly. And then finally, logging and reporting.
Okay.
Super important. You want to keep track of which tests were executed, what the results were, any errors that occurred.
So you have a record of everything that happened.
Precisely.
Awesome. All right, so we've covered test scenarios, test cases, test scripts.
The big three.
The big three, yeah. Looking at all of these, are there any like overarching best practices for test documentation in general?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, consistency is key.
Okay.
You want to use the same formats, the same terminology, the same naming conventions across the board.
Right. So everything looks uniform and professional.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we've talked a lot about writing clear, reusable, maintainable test cases
Right.
and making sure you can trace them back to the requirements.
Right.
That's all still super important.
Absolutely.
Another good principle is to keep your test cases independent.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means you don't want one test case to depend on another test case passing.
Oh, okay, I see. So they should each be able to stand on their own.
Exactly, yeah. That way, if one test fails, it doesn't create a domino effect.
Right. That makes debugging so much easier.
Right. And then, of course, we talked about automation.
Right.
Wherever you can, automate those repetitive and stable test cases.
Right.
That'll save you a lot of time and effort in the long run.
So the ultimate goal here is to create like this beautiful body of documentation, right?
Yeah.
That's accurate, it's comprehensive, it's easy to understand, easy to use, easy to maintain.
Exactly, yeah.
And it should be useful for everyone on the team, not just the testers.
Definitely. When you have good test documentation, it really helps the whole development process.
Makes sense. It's like having a shared understanding of how the software should work.
Right. And it helps improve communication, reduce misunderstandings, and ultimately leads to better software.
So it's not just about finding bugs, it's about building a quality product from the ground up.
Exactly.
Wow, this has been such an eye-opening deep dive into the world of test documentation.
Yeah.
We've gone from the high-level vision with test scenarios to the detailed instructions with test cases to the automation power of test scripts.
It's amazing how much thought goes into making sure the software we use every day actually works.
Yeah, it's a whole world behind the scenes.
It really is.
So for our listeners out there, I want you to think about this.
Okay.
The next time you're using an app or a website or some piece of software that's just working perfectly, it's smooth, it's reliable.
Yeah.
Take a moment to appreciate all the work that went into testing it.
Absolutely.
Because behind that seamless experience, there's probably a whole team of testers who meticulously planned and executed all these tests using all these documents that we talked about.
Yep.
The test scenarios, the test cases, even the test scripts, it's all connected.
It's a testament to the power of good test documentation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.
See you then.